Hi, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to rank the films of Andrei Tarkovsky, one of my favourite filmmakers, sort of the last word in spiritual, transcendent filmmaking, isn't he? He completed 7 features before he died, and I love all of them. I think they're all masterpieces, so ranking them is a bit arbitrary, so if you don't like the way I've ranked them, you can tip it up the other way around and I'd be quite happy. But this is just a celebration of his great work. Now, in 7th place, I'm going to put his last film, The Sacrifice. Now, this is a film that I admire very, very much. I think it's a beautiful piece of work. But it's the one film of Tarkovsky's that I've never really got on with. I admire it, but I don't particularly like it very much. It sees Tarkovsky move into sort of Bergman territory. He made it in Sweden with Erland Josephson, one of Bergman's favourite actors. And one time he ran the Swedish National Theatre, I believe. And it's this guy who's worried about the state of the world, the potential nuclear apocalypse. So he makes a deal with God that he'll do these extraordinary things. He'll burn down his house. He'll throw away everything he has. He has sex with a witch or something at some point. He goes through this extraordinarily weird deal with God to stop the apocalypse. And I think that's part of my issue with this film, beautifully constructed though it is. It takes sort of Tarkovsky's mystical philosophy to its limit, really, to the point where it teeters on being ridiculous. This whole, the whole metaphor that he indulges in of the holy fool, which kind of appears in one way or another in all his films. Here it reaches its kind of rather clumsy apogee, really, and I'm not so sure I go along wholeheartedly with that. It's an extraordinary film. The set piece at the end of the house burning down in real time. They actually constructed this house and burnt it down in over a 10-minute sequence shot, and the orchestration of that is extraordinary. It really is brilliant cinema. And so there's a great deal to admire in this movie, and it's definitely worth anyone's time. But it's probably the one I like least of his work. In 6th place is Solaris. Now, this might surprise people who've been watching my channel regularly and know I'm a bit of a science fiction fan. And of course, this is one of the great science fiction films ever made. It really is. Even though it's 6th in this list, I think it's a masterpiece. But Tarkovsky once said about this film in an interview that actually it was his least favourite film, the one he felt was least successful. And actually, I kind of agree with him. I think from an aesthetic point of view, it's his least satisfying work. And partly it's to do with the science fiction. You can see that it takes off from the Stanislav Lem novel about these Russian cosmonauts have found this planet, which is one great big ocean. And the ocean is sentient. And it can make your dreams come literally to life, right? And it's about that the mission there goes wrong, and this guy is sent to find out what's gone wrong. And you can sense that what Tarkovsky is trying to do is move away from the science fiction element to a more spiritual reading of that idea. And he doesn't quite make it. The science fiction sort of pulls him down. I mean, I think it's done very well, but you can see that he's trying to move away from that. And in Stalker, which is also based on a science fiction novel, he makes it. That film almost has no science fiction elements in it at all, and it's a much freer film. So I'm being harsh on Solaris. I love this film passionately. I really do love it. But I agree with Tarkovsky that it's perhaps his least satisfying from an artistic point of view. I want to say 2 other things about Solaris before we move on. The first is that I've always felt that a marker of whether someone is a Tarkovsky fan or not is whether they like the motorway sequence. You know, the sequence that comes in about 2/5 of the way through the film, where he's in a motorway and he's being taken to the spaceship, and it was all filmed on the outskirts of Tokyo, on the Spaghetti Junction system there. And I think that's the bellwether test of whether you like Tarkovsky or not, whether you love that sequence. I met this guy once. We were talking in the National Film Theatre in London, and we were talking about Tarkovsky and how much we liked Solaris. And he goes, "It is a superb film, a masterpiece, but apart from the gratuitous motorway sequence." I had that kind of, Roy Scheider in Jaws moment, because to me, it's one of the great moments in Tarkovsky. I absolutely love it. This brilliant metaphor of moving across space, a journey across space, but also moving inwards into the interior of your mind, which is what the journey to Solaris is, done in this strange but beautiful metaphor of this motorway moving endlessly into this city. I think it's one of the great moments of Tarkovsky's work. I adore it. The other thing I'd like to say about Solaris, just quickly, is this is my universal film. Let me explain. What I mean by that is, this is the film I would like to see every filmmaker ever to have made. I'd love to have seen Ozu's Solaris, Peckinpah's Solaris, von Sternberg's Solaris, Orson Welles' Solaris. I think it's a film that could be endlessly remade. Of course, it has been remade. It was remade by Steven Soderbergh with George Clooney. And that was a film that got a bit of a drubbing from the critics, as you could predict. Actually, on its own terms as a sci-fi movie, it's good. It's a really good movie. It stands up. Check it out. It's nothing like the Tarkovsky film. It doesn't go for the sort of transcendental, transcendence of the science fiction story. It's a straightforward sci-fi film, but it's very beautifully made and acted. And that's what I mean. You could do this in so many different ways. It's the universal film. I'd love to see, I'd love to see Cronenberg's Solaris. I'd love to see Rossellini's Solaris. It would just be, I'd have a film festival full of different versions of Solaris. I'd love that. At number 5 is probably Tarkovsky's most underrated film, Nostalghia. This was his penultimate film. And he was already now in exile in Italy. And this is what this film is about. It's about exile. It's about a Russian guy travelling through Italy, and he's thinking back onto his homeland. I think it was made in conjunction with RAI, Italian television, and it's often neglected amongst Tarkovsky's works. I think it's incredibly beautiful. It starts and ends, it's bookended with two of the most beautiful shots you will ever see, and even in Tarkovsky's work. The starting shot is it's mist completely covers the camera, and then slowly it sort of peels away, and you see a car on a landscape. It's an extraordinary shot. And then there's the final shot of this film, which is the Tarkovsky shot, isn't it? All Tarkovsky fans love this shot. There he is. He's back in his homeland outside a Russian hut with his two beautiful Alsatian dogs. There's a river or a lake, I think, and the camera pans back, pans back, pans back, pans back, pans back. And then you see around him the Gothic arches of a ruined Italian cathedral. Sort of his whole dream of his homeland, sort of encased in the reality of where he really is. An extraordinary image. And one of the things that I find so beautiful is that the roundel of the Gothic tower behind him is actually reflected in the water of the lake. I think that's an incredible detail. I just think that's amazing. This film has come in for some criticism from some critics because of the treatment of the female character in it, who's his kind of PA. And she is rather irritating and rather badly characterised. But I think if you're going to dismiss all this beauty for just one character, blimey, you need to get out more. This is an astonishing movie. In fourth place, Ivan's Childhood. Now, this is another movie that it's tempting to downgrade because this is his first fiction feature before he really gets into Tarkovsky-ness, right? So this is a film that sits more easily with other European art cinema of its time. But that doesn't mean that on its own terms it isn't absolutely exceptional. This is a beautiful film. Every shot, every sequence, every set piece is filmed to perfection. And it's also deeply moving about this young boy who gets involved with the Russian army during the Second World War. One of the best portraits of childhood in wartime that there is in cinema. There are many good films on that subject, actually. Might do a video about it. But this is one of the absolute best. The photography, the realisation of the war, the realisation of its devastating effects on a young boy. And I realise that I'm talking at the time of the Ukraine war, and this is a Russian movie, but nevertheless, this is an extraordinary film. And I wish it could escape the reputation of just being his first film and be considered as a great film in its own right. Number 3, Andrei Rublev. This is Tarkovsky's great epic about this medieval icon painter going through various episodes in his life. This is an extraordinary film. It starts off with this incredible sequence with this guy, inventing the balloon about 300 years before balloons were invented, floating above this castle. It's an incredible way to start a movie. And then there's just one jaw-dropping sequence after another. The witch's sabbat with witches running through the trees into the water. Great scene. Through to the bell casting scene, and then the beautiful icons in full colour. An extraordinary movie. This version that I've got here is the 180-minute version. And this seems to be the version that DVD companies are going with. This is the one that they're restoring. The latest Criterion is this version, which is odd, because many years ago, Criterion released this on DVD, the 205-minute version, which I believe was smuggled out of out of Russia to America. I don't know if it says it on the back here. I understood it was kind of smuggled out, and somehow someone like Martin Scorsese got hold of it or something. People will know the story of this. And I don't know why this isn't being restored and made the official version, because it's actually much better. The 205-minute version is the way to go. It really is. It widens out and expands the themes of the film. It includes moments of animal cruelty, which were cut absolutely by the British film censors and still can't be shown in any British version. There's one horrible scene where this horse falls from a platform or whatever. And the other thing that it cuts that I think is very important is the scene at the beginning with the jester in the barn with the peasants. And they cut a scene where he pulls down his trousers and he's got a face painted on his backside. And that scene is much fuller in the 205-minute version. And it's such a crucial scene for setting the placement in society of the monks to the peasants, to the jester, to the military. And I don't know why Criterion and other people like Artificial Eye have decided not to go with the 205-minute version. If you can get hold of this, okay, the quality is not as good as the Blu-ray, but watch it. This is the crucial version of the film. An absolute masterpiece. In second place, Mirror. This is Tarkovsky's most autobiographical film, looking back at his early life, really looking back at the life of his mother. It's kind of like a sort of Russian Tristram Shandy, where you're really looking back at the lives of his parents rather than him himself, though he does come into it later on. This is a sort of poem about his life and about Russia pre the Second World War in the times of Stalinism, and there's an extraordinary sequence where his mother, she works in a printing press, and she becomes concerned that a sentence or a line has got through in a book and that they could all be punished for it. And that sequence when she's going through the printing press, and then she finally realises that they're okay, and she walks down a corridor, and Tarkovsky has one of his father's poems read aloud on the soundtrack. Is an extraordinarily moving scene. It's a brilliant portrait of living in an authoritarian state, but also a paean to his mother at the same time. Incredible. The whole film works in that register. I think it's Tarkovsky's most purely beautiful film. Some people might accuse it of being his most vain film. One of the scenes towards the end is now as a young adolescent. He's in this room and he looks up at a mirror and he just looks at himself. And you see, the thing is, okay, you could say that there's a vanity there, a self-absorption. And I know one of my friends accused Tarkovsky of being vain. And I should tell you a little anecdote that Susan Fleetwood, the English actress and brother of Mick Fleetwood, who worked on The Sacrifice, told this brilliant anecdote once that they were waiting on the stage and they were quite cold. It was up in Sweden. And apparently, Andrei Tarkovsky was standing in front of a mirror adjusting his scarf and his hat for half an hour. So there probably was some vanity in Tarkovsky. But I don't think vanity is the right word. Self-consciousness is the right word. Think about Rembrandt, constantly painting himself self-portraits over and over again, watching him age, looking at the truth of his face, but also looking at the truth of him changing as a human being. And that's what I think really Mirror is about. It's a self-conscious assessment, both of himself and of his country and his culture. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's astonishingly moving, both literally and figuratively. And it's a film I go back to again and again and again. An astonishing achievement, I think. But my favourite film by Tarkovsky is the first film I saw of his. I saw this at the Ciné Lumière in Kensington in London, which is the sort of French institute, but they show all sorts of movies there. And they showed Stalker. I'd never seen Tarkovsky before. And I remember there was a shot right at the beginning in the sepia part of the film. A guy has to cross a warehouse to get to one of these little, those kind of carriages you see in old movies where they go up and down like that and it goes along a track. And he crossed this pool of water, this puddle, and the pool was like a sea. And the whole thing had a sort of, it's almost like stretching to eternity in my imagination. And this is when I knew that I discovered a filmmaker that I was never going to leave me. And the whole film just astonished me. It's based on a book by the Strugatsky brothers. If you ever go back and read the Strugatsky brothers, those of you who've seen the Alexei German film Hard to be a God, if you go back to that book as well, you'll find that the books by the Strugatskys, who are Russians, are very different from the films based on their work. Both Alexei German and Tarkovsky went for sort of epic art house, transcendental movies, whereas the original science fiction books written in the 60s are much more down to earth. I mean, Hard to be a God even has a kind of Douglas Adams-esque sense of humour to it. So Tarkovsky moves away from the book, which is called Roadside Picnic. He moves away from it quite a lot. In the book, it's made clear that a spaceship has landed and has created a zone around it, and you can go in there, into the zone, and you can have your deepest wish fulfilled. The spaceship is absent in Tarkovsky's work. In fact, all the science fiction elements are absent. And we're left with a very spiritual movement of three men towards a greater understanding within themselves, rather than a more external movement towards a kind of, science fiction zone, as it were. So this writer and this scientist hire a stalker. A stalker is a guide into this weird zone, which is forbidden. And inside the zone is a room, and if you go into the room, you'll have your deepest wish fulfilled. And the whole film is a kind of spiritual conversation about faith, really, about can you trust yourself to really want the best for humanity? Are you really going into this room as one of them thinks he is to help his handicapped brother? Or are you going to really come out with loads of money because that's what you really want? It becomes a sort of philosophical, spiritual discussion as they move through. And brilliantly at the end, the three men decide that they can't go in, they can't trust themselves, they lost their faith. But the camera backs into the room and we're suspended above this pool of water and we are inside the room. And what is our wish? It's an extraordinary moment. This film is full of extraordinary moments. It's an act of faith in itself. You're just watching three men walking around a dilapidated house in the country. It's lunacy, really. But it's the high point of Tarkovsky pushing that idea. Film as an act of faith, as a prayer. Are you going to go with this? And if you go with it, if you really get into the mindset of these men and what they're facing, it is the most powerful, uplifting experience in film, really. You could just see it as three men walking around a sort of dilapidated house and be bored out of your mind. You could experience something that is completely unique in cinema. It's kind of up to you. So that's my ranking of Tarkovsky. I love this director, and I'd love to hear anything you've got to say about this director below. Let me know your own ranking of his films and what moments have particularly inspired you. Thanks very much.